Nobody gets to walk away clean. That is the truth that Euphoria has been building toward all season long. And in Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7, titled The Weight of What You've Done, the show stops pretending that any of these characters are going to find a way out of the corners they have painted themselves into. Rue is one wrong move away from being exposed inside a world that kills people for far less. Cassie has crossed a line with Maddie that cannot be uncrossed, and the fantasy she has been living inside is beginning to show its cracks in ways she can no longer ignore. Nate has been pushed so far past the edge that the version of him we are about to see is not the controlled, calculating person this show introduced us to. It is something far more reckless and far more dangerous. Jules is standing in the ruins of a life she traded away for comfort, and realizing that the comfort was never worth the cost. And Lexi, who has done nothing wrong and continues to do nothing wrong, is about to have someone else's consequences land directly on top of her. Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7 is not the season finale, but it feels like the moment where everything that has been quietly deteriorating beneath the surface finally breaks through and becomes impossible to contain. This is not setup anymore. This is not the slow accumulation of tension. This is the explosion. Let's begin with Rue, because her situation at the end of Episode 6 has placed her in what is genuinely the most terrifying position she has occupied at any point in this entire season. And that is saying something, considering that this season has not been gentle with her at all. Going into Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7, Rue is carrying the weight of something that most people would not be able to function under. On one side, the DEA has made it abundantly clear that her cooperation is not optional, and that the moment she stops being useful to them, the deal disappears, and the years she was looking at before all of this started come back with interest. On the other side, she is standing inside an operation that is becoming increasingly volatile, increasingly paranoid, and increasingly capable of doing something permanent to somebody who gives them a reason to. And after everything that happened in Episode 6, after the tension that has been building around Bishop and his quiet, unsettling way of watching her, after Magic's continued insistence on pointing a finger in her direction, Rue is running out of room to maneuver. There is a quality to her situation that goes beyond just danger. It has crossed over into something almost claustrophobic, because no matter which direction she looks, there is something waiting to destroy her. The DEA in front, Alamo and his people behind, and Rue standing in the middle of it, trying to keep her footing on ground that is becoming less stable with every single day that passes. What makes Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7 feel so critical for Rue specifically is the question of what happens when someone who is already mentally and emotionally exhausted gets pushed just a little bit further than they can actually handle. Because that is where Rue is right now. She is not somebody who is operating from a position of strength or clarity. She is somebody who is running entirely on fear and desperation, and the sheer animal instinct to survive. And those are not sustainable fuels. They burn fast and they burn hot, and eventually they run out. And when they run out, the person who has been running on them tends to make a mistake. And in the world that Rue is currently living inside, a mistake does not mean an awkward conversation or a consequence that can be walked back over time. A mistake in Alamo's world means something that cannot be undone. I think what Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7 is going to show us is Rue beginning to fracture under that pressure, in a way that she has been managing to hold together until now. There have been moments this season where you could see the cracks starting to form, moments where her composure slipped just slightly, where the fear behind her eyes became a little too visible, where she said something or did something that was just a fraction off from what someone in her position should have said or done. And Bishop noticed. Bishop has been noticing all along. The question of whether Alamo is going to start paying attention to what Bishop has already seen is one of the central tensions of Episode 7. And I think the answer to that question is going to define the back half of this season in ways that are going to be almost unbearable to watch. There is also the matter of the guilt that Rue has been carrying, because this is something that I think the show has been handling in a very particular and very deliberate way. The security guard who got punished for something he had absolutely nothing to do with, something that was entirely a consequence of Rue's involvement with the DEA, is not a detail that this season has forgotten about. It is a detail that it has been sitting with, letting it collect weight, letting it grow into something that Rue cannot simply compartmentalize away, no matter how hard she tries. Because Rue is not a sociopath. She is not someone who can watch an innocent person suffer for her choices and feel nothing about it. She feels everything about it. And in Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7, I think that guilt is going to become a factor in how she behaves in a way that could make her position significantly more dangerous. Because guilt makes people act irrationally. It makes them second-guess themselves at moments when they need to be decisive. It makes them hesitate when hesitation is the one thing they cannot afford. And if there is a moment in Episode 7 where Rue is required to be completely cold and completely calculating, the guilt she is carrying about that guard is going to be the thing that makes her blink when she should not blink. That is the kind of character detail that Euphoria has always been exceptional at. The way it shows you how the emotional consequences of what a person does follow them into every subsequent situation and complicate everything that comes after. Rue's guilt is not just a moral weight, it is a tactical liability. And in Episode 7, I think we are going to see exactly what it costs her. Then there is the question of the DEA and how much longer this arrangement can continue to function in any meaningful way. Because the thing about being an informant inside an operation like Alamo's is that the value of what you are providing has to remain consistent. You cannot simply exist inside the operation and give the DEA small pieces of nothing and expect them to keep honoring the deal. They need results. They need information that moves their case forward. And the longer Rue goes without being able to provide something genuinely significant, the more pressure they are going to apply to her to deliver. In Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7, I think that pressure is going to become visible in a new way, because the DEA is not an abstract threat. They are a constant presence in Rue's life, a constant reminder of the deal she made and the consequences of breaking it. And if they start pushing her harder to give them something more substantial, she is going to be forced to take risks inside the operation that she has been trying to avoid taking up until now. And every risk she takes inside that operation is another opportunity for Bishop's instincts to be confirmed. That is the spiral that Rue is caught in right now, and Episode 7 feels like the moment where that spiral starts moving faster than she can keep up with. Now let's talk about Cassie, because where Episode 6 left her is genuinely one of the most interesting and uncomfortable places she has been in across the entire run of this show. And what Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7 looks like it is building toward for her is something that I think is going to force people to completely reckon with what this storyline has actually been about this whole time. Because on the surface, Cassie's story this season has looked like a success. It has looked like a girl who was always underestimated and always overlooked, finally getting what she deserved. The attention, the validation, the financial independence, the sense of being seen. But the thing is, none of that is what has actually been happening. What has actually been happening is that Cassie has been trading one form of exploitation for another. In the past, she was exploited by the boys who wanted something from her and then discarded her when they got it. And now, in a world that she thinks is finally treating her the way she deserves to be treated, she is being exploited again, just more elegantly, just more sophisticatedly, just in a way that is harder to recognize because it comes wrapped in follower counts and money and the language of empowerment. Brandon is not someone who sees Cassie as a person. He sees her as a product. And the apartment question that came at the end of Episode 6, that seemingly casual, "What's stopping you from moving in?" is the next step in a process of isolation that has been happening gradually and quietly all season long. What makes Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7 so significant for Cassie is the Maddie element. And I think this is the part of her storyline that is going to be the most painful to watch unfold. Because what happened between Cassie and Maddie in Episode 6 was not just a business disagreement or a falling out between friends who had a difference of opinion. It was a fundamental revelation of what Cassie has become inside this new world she has entered. The person who said, "It's not personal, it's just business," to Maddie, is not the Cassie that this show has been following for 3 seasons. Or maybe, more accurately and more tragically, it is a version of Cassie that has always existed underneath the surface. The version that has always been willing to prioritize her own survival and her own validation over the feelings of the people who genuinely care about her. But it is a version that has been given permission to exist fully by the world she has entered. Brandon's world does not reward loyalty. It does not reward genuine human connection. It rewards image and usefulness and the ability to produce content that keeps the numbers going up. And Cassie has absorbed those values in a way that she has not even fully consciously registered yet. She thinks she is just being professional. She thinks she is just being smart about her career. What she does not see yet is that she is becoming something she would not have recognized or liked a year ago. And in Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7, I think Maddie is going to be the mirror that forces her to see it. Because here's the thing about Maddie. Maddie has always been one of the most emotionally intelligent characters in this show when she is not inside the worst of her own spirals. She sees people clearly. She understood Nate in ways that nobody else did, and she understood herself clearly enough to eventually walk away from a situation that was destroying her. And now that she has been pushed out of Cassie's world, now that the "just business" comment has made it clear that Cassie is no longer operating as a friend or a human being, but as someone who has fully adopted the transactional logic of Brandon's world, Maddie is going to respond in a way that is true to who she is. She is not going to disappear quietly. She is not going to absorb that and move on and let Cassie have her success without consequence. Maddie is going to say something or do something in Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7 that forces Cassie to reckon with what she has done. And the question is whether Cassie is at a place yet where she can actually hear it, or whether she is so deep inside the world she has built that the truth is just going to bounce off her and make the rift between them even wider. I think it is the latter. I think Cassie is not ready to hear it yet, but the fact that Maddie is going to try, the fact that this confrontation is coming, means that the seeds of Cassie's eventual reckoning with herself are being planted right now. And Episode 7 is where that planting happens in a way that cannot be undone. The Brandon element of Cassie's story in Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7 is also worth examining on its own, because I think the show is about to pull back the curtain on who he actually is in a way that it has been resisting until now. Up to this point, Brandon has been presented as charming and attentive and supportive in a way that is seductive precisely because Cassie has never really been with someone who made her feel seen in that particular way. But everything about the dynamic he has been creating with her has the architecture of control. The social media presence he built around her, the followers he gave her access to, the financial arrangement that has made her increasingly dependent on him. And now the question of moving in, which would represent the final piece of an arrangement that would make Cassie completely surrounded by his world, with no independent life or support system of her own. That is not love. That is not even affection. That is construction. That is someone building a situation that maximizes their own control and minimizes the other person's ability to leave or to see clearly. And in Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7, I think we are going to get a glimpse behind the charm in a way that is going to be chilling, even if Cassie herself is not yet in a place to interpret what she sees accurately. Moving to Nate, because where Episode 6 left him is not a place that allows for a quiet or stable Episode 7. And I think Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7 is going to be one of the most volatile and unpredictable chapters of his storyline in the entire season. The image of Nate at the end of Episode 6, the bottles, the fast food bags, the voicemail, the complete collapse of the carefully maintained persona he has always projected, was one of the most striking visual statements this season has made about any character, because it communicated in a single image everything that words would have taken 3 scenes to convey. This is not a man who is struggling. This is a man who has already hit the bottom and is now lying in it, trying to figure out how to function from a place that does not allow for the kind of functioning he has always relied on. Nate's identity has always been built around strength and control and the ability to dominate any situation he finds himself in. And right now, he has none of those things. He has no money, no control, no power, no Cassie, no father, no structure. He has nothing except the debt that Naz is coming to collect, and the recklessness that comes from a person who has already lost everything, and therefore has nothing left to protect. In Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7, I think the Naz situation is going to reach a point that it cannot be managed or delayed anymore, because the timeline on that debt was never going to stretch indefinitely. Naz is not someone who operates on goodwill or patience. He is someone who operates on consequences, and the consequence of Nate failing to produce what he owes has been arriving in installments up to this point. The visits, the beatings, the escalating pressure, but episode 7 feels like it is building towards something more final than that. I think Naz's people are going to give Nate an ultimatum that is not about money anymore, because the money has clearly not been coming. I think it is going to be about what Nate can give them that is worth more than whatever he owes. And the only thing Nate has that could be worth that kind of currency in that kind of world is information. The question is what information he has and what giving it up would cost him, and whether he is at a desperate enough point that he is willing to pay that cost. I think the answer to the last part of that question is yes. Nate in episode 7 is someone who has already lost almost everything. He is not making decisions from a place of strategy or caution. He is making decisions from a place of raw survival instinct. And survival instinct, in someone who has always operated with a certain ruthlessness, can produce choices that are explosive and irreversible, and that send shockwaves through everyone around them. There is also the Cassie dimension of Nate's episode 7 situation, because that voicemail did not exist in a vacuum. That was a man reaching out to the one connection he still feels like he has, however distorted and complicated that connection might be. And what happens when Cassie does not respond the way he needs her to, or worse, does not respond at all, is going to matter enormously for where Nate goes in this episode. Because Cassie has become something specific in Nate's mind this season. She has become the thing that he thinks he can still control, the thing that represents some version of the life and the status and the stability that he once had. And if that rope gets cut, if Cassie makes it definitively clear through her silence or her response that she has moved completely beyond his reach, the psychological impact of that on someone who is already this destabilized is difficult to overstate. Nate without an anchor is a genuinely frightening version of this character. And I think Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7 is going to show us exactly what that looks like. Jules' story in Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7 is the one I find myself thinking about most quietly. Because the pain she is dealing with does not make noise the way Rue's situation makes noise, or the way Nate's situation makes noise. It sits underneath everything she does and says, and it only becomes audible if you are paying very close attention to the spaces between her words and the expressions that cross her face when she thinks nobody is watching. By the end of episode 6, Jules was standing in a position that was precarious in a specific, concrete way. The person whose lifestyle she has been living inside was beginning to ask questions. The discovery of someone else's clothing was the kind of thing that changes the texture of an arrangement very quickly, and the stability that Jules has been relying on to avoid having to confront her own emptiness was starting to become uncertain in a way that it had not been before. In Euphoria Season 3, Episode 7, I think that instability is going to become complete, and Jules is going to find herself in a moment where the comfortable structure she built around herself to avoid feeling the loss of her passion and her sense of self is no longer there to hide behind.